Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Oregon Trails Funding and Assistance Opportunities webinar. My name is Steph Knoll. I'm the director of the Oregon Trails Coalition, and I will be moderating today's session along with sharing some additional opportunities not covered by today's presenters. We would love for attendees of today's webinar to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know who you are and where you work, who you work with. And it's most fun if you check the panelist and attendees option on the chat when you're sharing so that everyone else on the call can enjoy knowing who is tuning in as well. As an attendee, you are invited to submit questions in the Q&A at any time. So feel free to submit those questions during our presentation, and then we will have some time for today's presenters to respond to questions at the end of the session. We are planning on going for Q&A between mostly 1 and 1:15 unless we are ready to move to that earlier than planned. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we expect to make the recording available on the Coalition blog by Friday of this week at the latest, and that's at OregonTrailsCoalition.org. And I wanted to let you know that along with the webinar recording, we will be sharing links from our that our panelists share throughout as well. So if you miss a link at any time in the session, know that you'll be able to look at our blog for those links as well. So I want to extend gratitude to all of today's presenters. Our agenda is packed. So each of these presenters have signed up to share very valuable information with you in a very short package today, and hopefully give you the information that you need so that you know which of these programs and opportunities you want to follow up and learn more about. I wanted to also just share a few quick resources. This is a slide from the Oregon Trails Coalition's Ready, Set, Plan Introduction to Trail Planning and Development Guide that's available on our website. I wanted to acknowledge that trails, there's all these different aspects of the trail planning, development, and construction process. Often they all need different funding, or not different funding mechanisms, but all cost something to get done. So we will try to, throughout today's webinar, kind of touch on which phase of trail development and construction and stewardship some of these funding mechanisms can help out with. And also just wanted to let you know that there's also information in the Ready, Set, Plan guide and resources about making the case for trails and kind of questions to ask yourself to help guide what kinds of funding mechanisms might be the right ones to look for. So hope you can make use of those resources. We'll share those links in the chat. And with that, we have a packed agenda today. So I'm going to pass it off to our first panelist, who's going to start with kind of a trails funding project case study. And I welcome Patrick Shannon.
Hey, thanks, Steph. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patrick Shannon. I'm the Pacific Northwest and Alaska Director at the National Forest Foundation. And I'm going to share a presentation here as I pull it up about a project we did involving different types of money that we put together to complete a project. Some of you might be familiar with. So this is a presentation about the Trillium Lake Boardwalk project on the Mount Hood National Forest. Mount Hood National Forest. If you have not been to this area, this is a great snapshot of why this lake is really popular. It's a beautiful shot of Mount Hood, and the lake is usually so much more busy than this. And so it's a popular place. If you don't know the National Forest Foundation, our mission is to engage Americans in the restoration and enjoyment of national forest and grasslands. We do this all across the country. And I will also note that we also work off of national forests and grasslands when it's makes sense for the National Forest Unit. So diving into this project, again, I mentioned it's on the Mount Hood National Forest. This Trillium Lake Trail actually loops around the lake, and it's a really popular trail, again, a very busy area. There's a campground that's located on the lake as well. But since 2018, the boardwalk, sections of the boardwalk have been closed. Essentially, they've been deteriorated, but beaver work did not help the wood structure of the boardwalk at all. So we worked with the Forest Service to say, well, we'll take on this project and we're going to replace the really bad sections of the boardwalk, which was quite a bit of feet of boardwalk work. So here's an image of Trillium Lake, campground on the right, and the two circles of red above are the sections of the boardwalk we're talking. There are other sections of the boardwalk on the trail, but these are the ones that were really in the water and were frankly, you know, kind of dangerous for people. Here's a couple slides of what the conditions were. And this was actually taken a few years ago, so they would have been even worse. But I think you can kind of get the picture. You know, the Forest Service was just really concerned about people being out there. So in terms of this partnership, I'm going to get to the funding at the end, but really what we did at the NFF, working with the Forest Service, we hired an engineering firm to create the boardwalk design. All of that work was coordinated with Forest Service engineers. So they were reviewing the plans, making adjustments, and we created a final plan that we were then able to hire a construction company for. But during that time, we also gave a grant to Northwest Youth Corps, which dismantled that bad sections of the boardwalk, and they did a great job. This is all last year, by the way, 2022. We did hire a contractor to start working on the boardwalk. The plan is it'll be fully complete in 2023. We had some challenges and delay. If people are familiar with some projects and construction, materials have been challenged to come by in a timely manner, and that was a big reason for the delay. But some of you who may have attended the Oregon Trail Summit might have volunteered with Trail Keepers of Oregon to do a work party on this trail. So this was the complete package. They, you know, again, the volunteers helped improve 500 feet of the trail. And you'll see essentially some of the boardwalk that they worked nearby. But I want to show this because this really involves a whole bunch of different partners, organizations, and it gives you the time frame of implementation. So this is essentially what construction looks like, getting the boardwalk prepared when it's dry. The contractor did have to pump some water out temporarily to make sure it was suitable for construction. And this is where things ended up about October. It got snowed out, and so the contractor had to pack up and come back when the snow melts, probably in late June or early July. You can see at least what it's going to look like once it's complete. So this is really the key slide, and the presentation is relatively short, but so the key partners on the left, obviously the Forest Service is really crucial to this. They're the landowners, but they also have the staff, the engineers and the recreation staff to really help guide this project and making sure that when the contractor is done, the boardwalk is delivered in a way that they really want. We really serve as, at the National Forest Foundation, an aggregator of funds, bringing funding together. And then, of course, hiring out the engineering firm, hiring out the contractor, but also providing grants like the Northwest Youth Corps. And then also just partnering with TKO, which we've done for many years on various projects. So I think the main point of this case study is to show you an example of funding situations and funding types. Really, it was the Forest Service that kind of came first and said, hey, we received Great American Outdoors Act funding. You know, NFF, can you help raise funding to get this work done? So we applied for an RTP grant with Oregon Parks and Recreation, and we were successful in getting that grant, which really was a big boost to our match that's required for Forest Service funding in our agreement. The bids came in much higher than we expected, and so we actually had to really kind of find a lot more money. Oregon's Mount Hood Territory, which is the tourism agency for Clackamas County, was really helpful in coming in towards the end with some additional funding. We also have a long-term partnership with Timberline Lodge. It's our ski conservation fund that we have with them, where their guests donate funding into this fund, and then we use it to improve usually recreation projects on the Mount Hood National Forest. And then finally, we still need to pitch in a bit more money. So we provided matching funds to really make this whole project complete. I can share that the engineering design cost around $25,000 and the boardwalk construction is $550,000. So that's the total of funding that we needed to raise. I believe that's it. And I know we're not going to do questions yet. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I'd be happy to type out some answers, or we can wait till the end and I'll answer them at that point. So.
Thank you, Patrick. And thanks for the reminder to all of our attendees today that you are welcome to submit questions using the Q&A feature. We'll definitely see them, or we'll try to catch them from the chat as well. And we will have question and answer time for all of our panelists at the end. And for today's webinar, we're going to start out talking about trails on federal lands to start with, because Oregon has so much public federal lands, and then we'll move to other kinds of trails on other kinds of lands as well. But I'm going to next introduce Zach Jarrett with our Regional Forest Service office to talk about some opportunities through Forest Service funding. Zach?
Well, hey, thanks, Steph. And I just got dropped from the call, so I'm actually ringing in on my cell phone. So I'm trying to get back in, and I'll join on video as soon as that may or may not happen. But thanks, Patrick.
Would you like us to try to give you a couple minutes to sort that out? I could talk about the Oregon Trails Fund and American Trails funding programs first and then pass it off to you. Would that work better?
Yeah, let's try that. I'm trying to get in now, so that may work out great. Thank you.
We're flexible here on our funding webinar, but I need to get myself in the right spot for screen sharing. Okay. So Zach's going to talk about some different funding sources that are available kind of to the national forests directly that they can partner with groups on shortly. But I wanted to introduce a couple of other funding mechanisms. The first one is, this is a likely one-time funding opportunity through the Oregon Trails Fund, which is managed through Travel Oregon. And this is a national forest and national scenic area, national grassland specific funding opportunity. And it's for stewardship capacity for shovel-ready projects. And eligible entities are Oregon nonprofits, and funds can be used for staff, for volunteer crew coordination, for trail ambassador activities. There's funding available for tools and volunteer supplies. And specifically where there's a big need on national forest land for trails for fire recovery or for responding to impacts of heavy visitor use, or for creating new visitor experiences in places where there are not enough visitor experiences available. This is not an open call for proposals exactly, so I will share a link when I finish talking and pass it to Zach, where you can learn some more information about this Oregon Trails Fund. And you will notice that the contact information on that page is mine. I am working with groups who think this funding might be a fit to get more information from them so that Travel Oregon can evaluate if that group should proceed in conducting a full project readiness assessment or not. I also wanted to share a national level opportunity available through our friends over at American Trails, and it's called the Legacy Trails Program. And it is, again, a national forest lands specific program for trail projects which improve watershed health. They're in their first funding cycle now, but keep an eye out this fall for a new funding cycle for this trails program, and we'll share links for that as well. And then I also wanted folks to be aware of the Federal Lands Access Program. This is a program administered through the Federal Highway Administration, And these are large grants. They're available for both planning and construction, and they're for entities who are working with federal lands managers to provide access to federal lands. So projects need to be on or adjacent to lands, and it's not a trail specific fund. It can also fund roadways and other kinds of enhancements, but there have been some big trail projects in Oregon that have received flat funding, including the Oregon Coast Trail and the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail. So they don't have their next call for proposals posted yet, but this is a good program to look into as well for federal lands. I also wanted to flag on the Bureau of Land Management side that there's a recreation and visitor services opportunity that's open right now. I think the best path for that is definitely to talk to your local or to our state BLM staff about whether or not your project is a fit for that current recreation and visitor services opportunity. And then I also just wanted to share that federal lands are also eligible for many of our other grant programs you'll hear about today, but we wanted to share some kind of federal land specific opportunities first. How is it going for you, Zach? Are you ready to jump in?
Yeah, I think I'm ready to go.
All right.
Well, hey, thanks for the flexibility. And, thanks for Patrick and Steph for sharing some of the partnership work that we've got going on in conjunction with a variety of different folks across the state of Oregon. I just wanted to touch on a couple of different funding opportunities that the Forest Service continues to have to invest in partnerships and do annual and deferred maintenance on about 15,000 miles of motorized and non-motorized trails across the state. So I'm just going to start with, our appropriated funding that we get annually from Congress. We've got a couple of different formulas that we use to distribute those funds across to the different national forests in the state of Oregon. We've got some baseline funding that gets spread to the units, and then the rest of those funds are distributed based on a formula that accounts for recreation visitation at the forest level. That accounts for about 50% of the way we distribute those funds, and then total trail miles that exist on a forest. So you could assume that a forest that has high visitation and has a high number of those 15,000 miles of trails will receive more funding than a unit that is in kind of the opposite position. Those funds are specifically earmarked to accomplish maintenance tasks on our trail network. And, at the forest level, our staff is making decisions around what's the best course of action to invest in those dollars. Some units invest heavily in force account crews. They've got trail crews that are going out and doing the maintenance. And some of those units invest in a variety of different things, including partnership agreements with many of you that have joined the call today. And then secondly, about 3 years ago, Congress passed the Great American Outdoors Act. And about $260 million has been set aside to invest specifically in deferred maintenance of recreation sites and trails across the nation. Region 6 receives approximately $10 to $14 million worth of that national fund annually. Of course, that's spread across both the states of Oregon and Washington. But we're making investments on backcountry trail bridge repair, front country trail bridge repair, deferred maintenance of our trail tread at both the regional office scale and down to the forest scale. The regional office has a multi-year project that's called a trail stewardship deferred maintenance bundle. So what that looks like is we're making direct investments into trail partner organizations to help accomplish some of those priority deferred maintenance actions across the region. There's several probably groups on this call today that I've been working directly with to stand up master cost share agreements to make those investments. And there's also forests probably on the call today that are continuing to put together forest or district level cooperative agreements to move some of that money via partners to get some of that work done. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention some emerging pots of money that have been kind of in the initial planning phases. We've got our infrastructure bill that's going to be making some investments in recreation sites and in trails across the region. And then we've got disaster recovery funding that's coming to the agency to do post-wildfire recovery work on trail assets, so trails, trail bridges. Some of those projects are getting generated at the forest level. Some of those projects are getting generated at the regional level, but specifically for infrastructure and disaster relief, you know, there's still a process that the agency is fully fleshing out to make some of those investments. So, you know, there's a variety of opportunities. I think, you know, over the last probably 20 years that I've been working in trails and recreation for the federal government, this seems like the biggest influx of funding to focus on recreation and trails that I've seen in the last 2 decades. So just wanted to say thanks to everybody that continues to lean into partnering with the Forest Service to do some of that work, and to then all the Forest Service staff on the call today, all the hard work to actually implement some of those projects on the ground. But yeah, that's just kind of an overview in addition to the Oregon Trail Fund that, you know, Steph had mentioned previously, trying to figure out ways to grow the pot of money in creative ways to do the highest priority work across the state. So looking forward to the other folks reporting out, and I'll be around for questions. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. And again, if folks have questions, we know we're throwing a whole lot of information at you quickly today. Feel free to share those questions in the Q&A. We will also, as I noted again, reshare these links that folks are mentioning in our blog post when we share the webinar recording to make them easy to grab. And also, we're hoping just to give you a little introduction today so you know where you want to dig further for more info. And with that, I will pass it off to Jodi Bellefuille with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department to talk about their grant programs.
Great, thank you so much, Steph, and good to hear from everybody else. So I'm good, screen sharing, showing, great, thank you. So hi, great, thanks. So I'm Jodi Bellefuille. I am with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and I'm just going to give a brief overview about the different programs that we administer here at state parks. So on your screen are the 5 statewide recreation grant programs that can fund trails and other outdoor recreation facilities. So I'm just going to give a really brief overview of these today. And like Steph said, we'll have lots of links and a recording of this afterwards. For more detailed information, you can visit the link that Steph will drop in the chat to our website. And you can also find our contact information so you can get a hold of the folks listed here for each program. So before I jump into each program, I just want to give some general guidelines to get an idea of what types of projects we fund. So the primary types of projects our programs fund are development and restoration of trails, trail facilities, and a wide variety of outdoor recreation facilities and parks. We can also fund land acquisition and a few other project types that I'll cover on the next slides about each program. And because we fund mostly construction type projects, your proposals should be fairly shovel ready when you apply. And as far as what types of organizations can apply, that does vary by grant program, which I'll also give you an idea of, because 2 of our programs do allow nonprofits to apply. So you might have a choice depending on your project on who can apply, like the project Patrick talked about where the National Forest Foundation applied versus the Mount Hood National Forest. So there are some options depending on which program you're looking into. And as far as funding, these are competitive grant programs, some more than others. And if awarded, we issue funds on a reimbursement basis as you complete work and as things are billed. However, we do have an ability to make some partial advance payments if that is an immediate flag for you. If you're a small trail nonprofit, that's something we can definitely talk through. There's limitations, but definitely get a hold of us if that seems to be a barrier for you, and we can explore that. And each program does require match contribution, and most programs allow you to capture your in-kind and volunteer labor. So it doesn't necessarily need to be cash match for all these programs. Again, going back to that Trillium Lake example that Patrick talked through, they can capture volunteer labor from Trail Keepers of Oregon. Youth corps typically contribute in-kind labor. So those are some examples of the non-cash match that you might be able to capture when you're applying for funding. And then you have 2 years to complete the project, which goes back to sort of the readiness piece. And related to these being competitive programs, we have committees for each program that ultimately recommend which projects are funded. And the last requirement I wanted to point out is that these projects must be on public land, and how long that site remains open for public use depends on the program and does vary a little bit. And I wanted to mention this because I know there are some trail systems that are on private land, or maybe you have a use agreement on timberland, but those may not always meet the requirements we have here, like on the example on the screen of 25 years for RTP, it must be dedicated to public use forever for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So that can be a flag too if you are developing trails on private land. And then to navigate our different programs, check out the link to our website that Steph will share in the chat. And on our website, you can find all the very detailed information about our grant programs, each of our manuals, our schedules that we run our cycles on, information about program-specific webinars that some of us hold or recordings to those past webinars. And you'll also find information about how to access our online application system we use, and of course, our contact information, because for all of our programs, we are here to help. So you can always call or email the grant program coordinator and we can help you through deciding which program to apply to or through the application process itself. So the first program I want to give an overview of is the Recreational Trails Program, or RTP, and this is the one that I work with specifically. This is a federally funded grant program, and Oregon receives about $1.5 million a year, and we grant that out annually. 30% of that is set aside for motorized trail projects, so ATV and snowmobile trails, and then the remaining funds are for non-motorized trail projects, which also includes water trails. We do require a 20% match for RTP. There's a $10,000 minimum award amount, and for non-motorized trail projects, we have a $150,000 recommended max for what you can request. And we most commonly fund new trails, restoration or improvements to existing trails, trailheads or other supporting amenities. And then we also do have some carve outs to fund safety and education projects, land acquisition, equipment, and assessment of a trail system for accessibility or maintenance needs. And for RTP, all types of government land managers are eligible to apply. So local, state, federal, and tribal. And this is one of our 2 programs that does allow nonprofits to apply. So as long as you have been a registered nonprofit for at least 3 years, you can apply for RTP, of course, by coordinating with the land manager that you're proposing to do work on. And RTP is scheduled to open for application again in September. And for all the programs I'm going to go over, there are going to be some dates in here. Of course, these might change, but you can keep an eye on our website for the most up-to-date information on those. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is another federal grant program that we administer. This program has about $4 million per year, and that's made available through an annual grant cycle as well. Eligible applicants for this one include local governments, tribal governments, and state agencies, with at least 60% of those funds set aside for local and tribal governments. And there is a 50-50 match requirement for this one. And LWCF funds all types of public outdoor recreation facilities, including trails. Something especially important to know about this program is that once you use land and water funds in a park or along a trail, the boundary of that park or trail must be dedicated to recreation in perpetuity or forever. And a change to that boundary can be complicated, it can be costly. So it's important to just take careful consideration to which type of sites that you use these funds on. Linear trails can be a little bit tricky. The example in the bottom right of your screen there is the Bear Creek Greenway in Jackson County. Because especially with linear trails where you're crossing major roads, maybe you're going under a highway, those tend to have a little more impacts as far as their boundaries needing to be adjusted. So if you want to think about a good fit, sometimes that can be your trails that are within an actual park or a park that you want to dedicate to LWCF or that already has been dedicated to LWCF. So this program will open again, like I said, September 1st. These funds are less competitive, so definitely look into it. But just because of some of those considerations with the public use requirement, we do recommend you get in touch with our program staff early on for this one. Next up is the Local Government Grant Program. This is one of our larger programs and is currently open for application. This program will have at least $7 million available this cycle. And the match requirement for this one does depend on the population of the jurisdiction, so the city or county or district that's applying. And the application deadlines are coming up in April or May, and they do vary by funding category. So you'll apply under one of the funding categories listed there on the screen. So small grants up to $75,000, large grants up to $750,000, or up to $1 million for a land acquisition. And then planning grants. I want to make a plug for this one because small communities can apply for planning funds to complete a park master plan or even a trail system plan. So typically with these funds, we see communities hiring a consultant or a planner to support a public input process and develop a site-specific or system-wide plan, whether that's a concept plan or just a system-wide plan for your whole park system. It's similar to Land and Water Conservation Fund. This program funds trails and all other types of outdoor recreation facilities. And eligible applicants include cities, counties, metro service areas, park districts, and port districts. And if you want to learn a lot more about this program, Mark Cowan, who runs this program, will be holding a webinar tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So I think Steph will, already did, drop the registration link for that webinar if you're interested. Otherwise, a recording of that one will be posted on our website under the Local Government Grant Program. So don't worry if you're going to miss that, but there'll be a lot more detail shared tomorrow through that. And next up is our ATV Grant Program. The big message here is that if you're involved with management of OHV trails, and if you're not already connected to our ATV team, reach out to them, because beyond the grant program that we have, our ATV team also has safety and education resources, training opportunities, and a lot of other resources for you. But as far as the grant program goes, they have about $11 million each biennium, so that covers 2 years. And most of those funds are made available for operations and maintenance, support that goes directly to the land managers to staff and maintain those trail systems, as well as law enforcement or EMS for ATV riding areas. And then the remaining 10% is set aside for bigger development projects or planning and land acquisition. And this one also requires a 20% match. And eligible applicants are any level of government agency who manages OHV trails. And this is our second program besides RTP that's open to nonprofits. So similar to nonprofit or to RTP, the nonprofit must be registered for at least 3 years prior to applying for this program as well. And the most recent grant cycle just closed. They typically open a big grant cycle every 2 years. So the next one will come up in fall of 2024. But sometimes there is some funding that's set aside between that. So it's possible that there could be a smaller grant program that opens later this year. But again, if you manage ATV trails and don't already know this program, definitely reach out to those staff. And then the last of our recreation programs is the County Opportunity Grant Program. And this is open to counties for projects within their county operated campgrounds. And this could be relevant to trails if there are trail projects within that campground, or for campgrounds that also serve as staging areas or trailheads, like many of the county run campgrounds in the Oregon Dunes area. And applications will be accepted for the next round of funding for this program starting in August. And before I pass it off to ODOT, just want to make a plug for our heritage programs. And these programs are administered by a separate division under the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And they have 8 programs that could be of interest to your community or your organization. Some of these can assist with restoration of historic sites or cultural and historic interpretation. You can learn more about these programs at the same link that Steph shared to our website, or get in touch with their program staff. That's Curry Gill. Her contact information is at that same link, and she can help you navigate those programs. With that, I will pass it back to you, Steph.
Thank you so much, Jodi. And next we will go to our friend Alan Thompson at the Oregon Department of Transportation to talk about Oregon Community Paths. Hi, Alan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alan Thompson. I'm with the ODOT doing the Community Paths program. And just a quick presentation. So you try to get this thing all nice and minimized. There we go. That background picture you see is from the flat program for the Columbia River Trail, just nice little background of what great things can be accomplished. And I can't seem to go to the next slide. There we go. Who am I? I'm the ODOT Community Pass Program Manager. I work at headquarters in Salem. I've been doing active transportation for about 20 years, both here in Oregon and in California. And we'll be discussing what is the Oregon Community Pass Program, how it's funded, who's eligible, what types of projects, and I have here key dates, which I've removed. But anyway, what we have is it's a sort of new program. We just finished our second solicitation, created under HB 2592 in 2019. It funds off-road active transportation, and the key word there is transportation. It's not recreation. Though it doesn't have to be exclusively transportation, it can serve a dual-use function. It's biannual competitive grant program. It started in 2020. It looks at two different types of things: critical links, our biking, walking connections to schools, downtown, shopping, employment, and other destinations. Think of it as a first mile, last mile to destinations. And regional pass, longer distance off-road pass serving communities such as the Oregon Bear Creek Greenway, Portland's Springwater Corridor. And the idea is some of these regional trails, such as the Bear Creek Greenway, when you start connecting them into cities and through cities especially, you get the opportunity to expand this trail into the city as community, because then you're getting a transportation purpose of people using the trail for utilitarian purposes within that area. So it's a great win-win situation of trying to work the two together. And here's a critical link, first mile, last mile example. This is a Story Riverwalk lighting that's in work right now. And you have the marina area as the project start going in through to a whole bunch of residential areas. And what they've done is they're installing lighting across the trail to be able to get more use of it in the winter months when it's very dark. So this improves a little bit of perceived safety and security along that trail, and it opens it up for a longer period of use in months where people may not be wanting to use it. Another example for a regional path where we're connecting communities, this is Newburgh connecting to Dundee. This is a 670-foot linear bridge right in the middle going over Hess Creek. And then they will be connecting all the way from this new development near Rogers Landing Park through the Phase 1 East Limit, which is also new development, and then connecting into Newburgh and developing about 3.5 miles of new trail connecting these two communities. And how it's funded. There are two separate sources. One is federal funding, which is the Transportation Alternatives Program. That is a formula allocation that comes to Oregon. Some of it goes to the state. Some of it goes to larger MPOs over 200,000. Some of it goes to the Recreational Trails Program that OPRD does. And so the amount fluctuates depending upon what the appropriations are every other year. And so we also have a big jump with the intermodal infrastructure IIJA. So that's bumped it up quite a bit. So we're getting about $9 million a year in federal funding, and about $18 million per cycle. And then the IIJA jumped it up to almost $30 million for this next 2 cycles. With one of them we just accepted applications on January 31st. The other one is Multimodal Electric Transportation Fund. The Oregon Highway Fund cannot be used for anything off-road. So that makes it very difficult for us at ODOT to be able to do anything beyond what is within the roadway right-of-way. So what we've done is been able to fund this through a bicycle excise tax, $15 on every bicycle over $200 sold in the state, and a portion of the vehicle privilege tax. It's limited to cash on hand. So this is almost like every 4 years, because we spend it all and we get about estimating around $900,000 a year. So once we get up to about $4 million a year, then we go ahead and have that, we'll put that into the next solicitation. So that will be there in 2024 when we do our next solicitation. So as biannual grant, I said that we had $30 million available for this last cycle, $27 million available in 2024. We're rebuilding that state funds, as I mentioned, and we should have around $4 million. We break it down into 2 things. One is project refinement, and that's just a fancy name for saying planning. And it has to be project-specific planning up to the first 30% design. So it takes care of the alternatives analysis, the final alternative, getting into the environmental prior to NEPA, getting yourself set up for NEPA. And so it's a great way of getting the project started, and then allows you to be fully ready for a construction grant later on, because you'll have your environmental, you'll have your scope of work, you will have your full technical scope of work, and be ready to go. The construction is 500,000 to 6 million. So we can fund an awful lot of stuff of regional. We're seeing a lot of bridges this time that in terms of applications. We're in the process of reviewing them now. So who's eligible to apply? Local governments, school districts, tribal governments, transit districts, and special government bodies. We've had a few parks and recreation districts apply for this. And nonprofits can partner with any of these agencies to apply. But you have to partner with one of these agencies. That's the only issue. And so we basically give the grant to them as the solicitor or of the grant. So that's how we're handling that. And what projects can we apply for? We mentioned project refinement. That's $150,000 to $750,000. We bumped it up from the first cycle in 2020 because inflation. And because it's a federal grant, ODOT has to administer it unless the applicant is certified to handle federal grants. And there's only 11 of those in the state. So ODOT would administer it, and that administrative cost plus hiring a consultant raises those costs up tremendously. So it informs future path development, narrowing down list of alternatives, potential environmental concerns, estimating the cost and schedule, and documenting community input and support. And we're looking very hard at equity and disadvantaged communities and historically marginalized communities when we talk about community input and support. We want to make sure that they are involved in not just reaching out to them, but also involved in the planning and development of projects moving forward. Construction is 500 million to 6 million, as I mentioned earlier. And I'll stop right there and answer any questions at the end. Thank you so much. And how do I stop sharing?
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you
so much. We are going to make what could be considered a big jump from these kind of paved transportation trail kinds of projects to our Oregon State Marine Board to talk about waterways projects. And let me get your slide up here for you, Janine, and welcome Janine to the webinar stage.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Steph. We're actually going to do 2 specific trainings. There is going to be a webinar for more of the construction aspect of things. Our construction program is eligible to cities, counties, ports, park districts, state and federal agencies, and tribal nations. And then the webinar 2 is available to all of those parties, plus nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, school districts, utilities, who want to do education and outreach about non-motorized boating or purchase equipment. So we've funded grants that will buy adaptive equipment, replace canoes or kayaks, also fund an outdoor school that wanted to do some specialized kayaking, canoeing with youth and trying to teach them about water. We've done waypoint finding signage to help locate things for water trails. So I want to encourage anybody who's interested in non-motorized or motorized access education to please sign up for the webinar, and I will give you a ton of details. For both of these, our grant deadline is March 13th, and this is an opportunity to learn additional details on it. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Janine. And just a reminder to everyone, you're welcome to submit questions for any of our panelists in the Q&A. And from here, we're going to go to Charlotte with the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund, who I believe is going to share her own slides. So I'll pass it off.
I will be. Thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, get my slides ready. And how do my slides look?
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for providing us the opportunity to share about the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund with you today. So the OSRF, if you're not familiar with this grant program, is housed within the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And really its purpose is to enhance the department's capacity to protect species and habitats identified within the Oregon Conservation Strategy, but at the same time really to increase and create new opportunities for wildlife watching, urban conservation, community science, and all other types of Oregon-focused wildlife-associated recreation, including trails. So really the mission of the OSRF is really broad, and pretty much the sky is the limit of what types of application and grant projects we do accept. We really are looking for projects that kind of span between conservation and recreation and really encourage individuals to embrace and be out in nature, but make sure that at the same time we really are protecting and enhancing the nature that people are out within. So these are just a couple of the examples of projects that we funded, and it's been everything ranging from outdoor schools to trail restoration to a building of new bridges and moving of trails away from areas where there are species that are at risk or habitats that are sensitive. We do accept pretty much all types of applications for construction, planning, trail management plans. The only thing that we tend to shy away from is land acquisition. And that's not a hard and fast no, but it is actually it's a hard area for us to fund in. So we try not to do that very often. So one thing that's really clear within our grants program is actually the focus on conservation and recreation, but really through an outdoor equity lens. The OSRF is dedicated to thinking about how do we increase access to nature within our grants. And most particularly, this is actually one of the major areas that our advisory committee does review while we look at our grant application. So currently the OSRF's largest pot of money that we're funding out of is actually the drought package that was allocated to the Oregon State Legislature in the last session. And we currently have about $4 million that we are providing out through a competitive grant cycle. The average size of our grants are about $40,000, although we do max out at $50,000 and we have no floor granting. So pretty much we accept small little grants up to $50,000. So we currently have a call for proposals open. It just opened in January 30th of this year, so just last week. And a couple of guidelines for us here at the OSRF is that our grant application will be open for the next 60 days. This is a competitive granting cycle, so you'll be able to go to the website listed below and be able to find more information about the grants. Our grants are actually focused for nonprofits. Particularly, we are needing you to be a 501c3 nonprofit. We have no guidelines for how long you've been a registered nonprofit, but you obviously need to be registered with the IRS and have a federal tax exempt ID number associated with their 501c3. If you are not a nonprofit, we do encourage you to partner with nonprofits, and you could be a partner on grants and apply to a fiscal sponsor or through that partnership. As mentioned, the maximum allowable grant size is $50,000. Very little is not allowed to be applied for, but we do have an institutional, organizational, and direct cap of 20%. We do have insurance guidelines. This is pretty standard for grants, but we do want to highlight that for our applicants because this is new to the program. So you'll be able to go to this website and see our application process. We do have some informationals coming up, so you'll be able to find that information on our website. And also, if you have applied to the OSRF before, We have a little bit of a clunky application. I want to highlight this. It's a two-part application with a written PDF or Word document form in addition to an online survey. We are moving away from this in the coming months, but at this point, this is kind of the system that we have. So please be aware that in order to apply, RFP is open, and we do want you to make sure you have to do both parts of this application. So how does the OSRF Advisory Committee score? These are some of the basic criteria that are used for our scoring. And you'll be able to download this online, but it really has to do with the clarity of the project, cost effectiveness, outdoor equity, as I mentioned earlier, is a really key aspect. In addition to a large portion of the project scoring criteria is this balance between conservation and recreation, and how does your conservation project deal with recreation, and how does the recreation focused project deal with conservation? So that kind of sweet spot that we've mentioned. Also, partnerships are key. So we really want this to be a community-driven and project. So if you are the primary applicant, please think about who you can bring in on your project and really broaden who is benefiting from this work. So as I mentioned, we have an informational coming up on February 17th. This will be recorded. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself as the OSRF Fund Coordinator. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you, all of our presenters. I'm going to give some kind of fast and furious overview of a number of other additional grant opportunities, and then we're going to move to a Q&A with all of our presenters. So if you're holding on to any questions or you have some occur to you, I invite you to put those in the Q&A now so we can get to those shortly with our Q&A time. So I wanted to start by going back over to our friends at American Trails. We mentioned the Legacy Trails program earlier. They have an additional program called the Trail Capacity Program. And it's a competitive grant program for trail maintenance and stewardship training. Again, this is a national program. You can see that there were 7 awardees last year, but that's another opportunity to look at for stewardship capacity dollars for taking care of trails. I wanted to mention Travel Oregon and the regional destination management organizations or local tourism organizations. In our case study at the beginning, Patrick mentioned how that project also got support from the Mount Hood Territory, which is the local tourism or DMO in that area. So Travel Oregon has different competitive grant programs. You can learn about them, get their notices by signing up for their industry newsletter. We'll share that link in the chat and on the blog afterwards. And then just encouragement to get to know your local and regional tourism agencies if you don't know them already. And you can also, if you're not sure who they are, you can navigate to them from Travel Oregon's website. If you look up Oregon tourism regions, find out who the folks are to be talking to in your region. I wanted to share a very small grant opportunity. If you have a small project or just have a small funding gap to get to the finish line that is on Oregon Parks land, the Oregon Parks Foundation Fund, which is a fund within the Oregon Community Foundation, makes $1,000 to $5,000 grants for acquisition, restoration, education and interpretive programs, or also trail construction and interpretation with a real focus on connectivity and access. So you can learn more about that for your small projects or small funding gaps. I wanted to talk about a couple of different planning resources. If you have planning needs on the transportation system side of things, kind of if you need to do planning on the local level for how your trail system integrates with the rest of your transportation system, or you need to do something like a whole trail system master plan, I suggest you take a look at the Transportation Growth Management Planning Grants. So these are transportation focused planning grants available through the Transportation Growth Management is a partnership between ODOT and our DLCD. And so they generally have an annual cycle. I don't see information for the 2023 cycle yet, but take a look at that if that is the level of planning you need to do in your community. And then another planning resource I wanted to share is the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. Now, it's important to clarify that this is not a grant, but it is an assistance opportunity where you can apply through this program to receive professional assistance with planning and project development and community outreach. And they have an open cycle right now with applications due March 1st. And again, this is a great, great planning assistance for all kinds of trails projects could potentially qualify for this, as well as other kinds of community recreation and conservation assistance. Going back to the transportation side of things, I want to make sure folks are aware of federal RAISE grants. These are through the US Department of Transportation. This is a large project kind of funding mechanism. There's 1.5 billion available nationally in 2023 through this program. And this can support both planning phase work as well as construction phase work, and supports projects that improve safety, equity, climate, and sustainability. And I want to just kind of make clear with this specific funding mechanism that really having local and regional support for kind of a big project is really key for this one, because it's a national opportunity, and it's kind of important for localities to kind of agree on what their priorities are for going after RAISE grants. But we have seen some trails funded through this program in the past in Oregon, including the oh my gosh, I'm losing the trail in Washington County. If someone grabs it in their mind before I do, feel free to drop it in the chat for me, or I'll find it. The Council Creek Trail, that's what I'm looking for, received RAISE funding in the last cycle, and we would love to see some more trails funded through this mechanism. And then I just wanted to give a quick, just share some other ideas of other programs to explore, generally for smaller grants. First of all, other local organizations to look at is your local metropolitan planning organization, or MPO. Soil and water conservation districts or park districts sometimes have small community project mechanisms. In the Portland metro area, I wanted to share that Metro currently has 2 different funding opportunities open: Nature and Neighborhoods Capital Grants, and their Regional Travel Options program could also fund some kind of light scale infrastructure, things like trail counters potentially, or bike racks. So those are two funding mechanisms to explore if you're in the Portland metro area. But regardless of where you are, you might want to just look into what those local entities provide, if anything. On the national scale, the Rails to Trails Conservancy has a trail development fund for rail trails. And again, it's a nationally competitive program, but might bear looking at. And then our outdoor industry partners have a number of private programs. So take a look at our various outdoor retailers and outdoor companies often have a philanthropic arm. Some of those opportunities fund infrastructure, some are more focused on programs or education. Generally, nonprofits are the eligible entities for those grants. And so with that fast rundown, I just wanted to again thank all of our presenters and remind everyone before we move to our Q&A that we will be sharing the webinar recording and links on our OregonTrailsCoalition.org blog. So if you registered for the webinar today, we will send you an email when that blog post is up, or you can check back at OregonTrailsCoalition.org. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can go to all of our presenters for some question and answer. And I'm just returning to look at the Q&A, so it might take me a moment to catch up, but if any of our presenters have been watching that and want to start us off by responding to anything they've seen, that would be great. And we still welcome additional questions as well.
It looks like most questions in the chat and Q&A have been answered, but I'm sure there's other burning questions out there. Folks want to fire away at us.
Or also if anyone saw anything in the Q&A that they maybe have responded to directly but would like to expand on or share additional context. I know I gave you all very little time to present today, and you did a fabulous job in delivering lots of information in a short time.
Well, hey, Steph, I think Kathleen Walker raised a pretty good question just about kind of the mechanics around how some of our cooperative agreements work, and how do we pass money through those agreements to contractors who are going to be delivering a component of the work on the ground. And Patrick, feel free to jump in here because you live this pretty regularly as well. But there's some contracting laws that the Forest Service is beholden to, mainly this Davis-Bacon prevailing wages mandate. So something to consider for folks partnering with the Forest Service, where we give federal dollars via a cooperative agreement, and at the back end, you're passing some of that money through to a contractor who's going to say, for example, be doing, mechanized trail construction as a component of that agreement. We typically require that they are beholden to those Davis-Bacon prevailing wages if they are a private business. But if you're passing money through to another nonprofit who can bring some of those specialized skills to the table, then we treat that similarly to how we would treat a grant, and they are not subject to the Davis-Bacon prevailing wages. And there's a lot of nuance in between, in the middle, that's going to differ on each project. But just wanted to kind of share that with the group because I thought it might be relevant for others who are partnering with the Forest Service. And Patrick, what did I miss there?
Yeah, well, I think you covered really most of it. Each state has their own Davis-Bacon wages per region. It's very specific, so you have to look them up. And then I'll just say, not everything requires that, though. For instance, for the engineering design work, there's no boots on the ground. That doesn't require Davis-Bacon wages. So it really depends on the type of work.
Thanks all. We've had a couple more great questions come through. First of all, I want to clarify that we won't necessarily be publishing the chat or the Q&A, but we will publish all the links that were shared in our blog post with the webinar recording. And then I wanted to go to a question from Fred of what advice do folks have for funding opportunities that support NEPA review for a trail project?
This is Alan. The one thing that I would think of would be that once you get into NEPA, you're no longer into planning, you are now in pre-construction. And if this is a federal grant, usually once you get into pre-construction, there's a requirement that it be constructed within 10 years. And I'm not sure how that works with other programs. I know that's how it works with mine. But that's the one thing that I would say is that it's considered pre-construction and not planning.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I would just add that, it's one of those categories that I think is always hard to fund through some of our traditional funding mechanisms. A lot of the times where I've seen nonprofit partners be successful is through private fundraising. But I'd also just mention that, I think most folks, if they private fundraise to get NEPA started, there's typically an expectation that the result of that NEPA process is going to yield a decision that their project can move forward. And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes for folks, because it's simply us going through our regulatory processes to make a decision. And sometimes that decision is that the project does not move forward. So there's some nuance there as well, but I have seen, a lot of our bigger partners be pretty successful in fundraising efforts to look at securing funds for that type of work.
I also want to share that we don't have a date yet, but the Oregon Trails Coalition does plan to offer this year kind of a what you need to understand about NEPA for trail advocates webinar. We're working with our partners over at CODA and Emmy Andrews to develop that specific training. And so we're excited to hopefully be able to share that with the broader community later this year. So if you're new to NEPA, or you are not new to NEPA but feel like you're still on the struggle bus with NEPA, hopefully that will provide some additional context, some helpful context. If folks have other thoughts on that, I think that is it can be a challenging piece to fund. And I guess this is the other thing I would flag is just continuing to work with the federal land management agencies on at least just understanding where your project is in their kind of priority list, and in terms of the other NEPAs they need to conduct, both for recreation projects but also for non-recreation projects, and kind of understand, so you'd at least understand in the flow kind of where it is in the priority list and hoped for timeline, because some agencies often have the resources to conduct NEPA internally, but it just depends a lot on how high your project is on that priority list. I don't know if there's a better way to put that, Zach. If there is, feel free to.
No, I think you nailed it, Steph. And I think there's a common misconception that third-party NEPA doesn't require much work on the agency side to actually work that through the process. But depending on who you're working with, who the contractor is, what their familiarity is with that local area, what their connections look like with staff on that unit, I've seen it go both ways, where it's pretty efficient, and I've seen it be, almost the Forest Service review being as lengthy of a process as it would have been to do it on their own. So yeah, there's some good examples in the state of Washington where there's some ex-Forest Service employees that have kind of retired and have some good connections. So, if folks are running into some roadblocks on finding a good source of, I think, contractor to do that work, then feel free to reach out to me. But I think the bigger concern is what Steph kind of alluded to, is that, programs of work get built early, and sometimes success is where you're on that list of priorities. So,
and just one more follow-up question before we leave the NEPA topic. Has any of the influx of funding that you referenced, Zach, resulted in more capacity for the local forests to conduct NEPA and do that kind of feasibility assessment, or is it not flowing that way?
Yeah, unfortunately, the sideboards on the funding is that it's got to hit the ground and primarily pay for deferred maintenance actions. And so, there's some mission support funding that gets carved off of those dollars, but typically that's more invested in engineering and design work. The hope is that most of those projects are quote unquote shovel ready. So they've been through NEPA, they've been through A&E design, and they're ready to move forward with implementation. Sometimes, obviously, that's not the case, but yeah, not typically seeing NEPA getting funded with, GAOA or you know, kind of to be determined on some of the new legislation with infrastructure. So I'll share out what I learned as that stuff develops, but yeah, we're not seeing many opportunities there.
Great. Well, maybe at least hopefully the presence of those funding opportunities for projects could help move some of these cool projects up in the NEPA priority list if there's that incentive for capturing some of these funds. That's my optimistic view and hope for it. I wanted to go to a question we had about river access locations. That the question from Mark is, thoughts on the best way to fund river access locations now that will eventually become trailheads access points for terrestrial trails that are still in the proposed conceptual stages. Maybe we could start by going to Janine with kind of how this may fit or not into your program, and then go to our panelists broadly.
Yeah, so if there's potential access, we're definitely looking at it from a boating perspective. If the river access is for angling, for swimming, for just viewing, because sometimes that in itself is a desired trait, then it wouldn't be eligible, or it would be a prorated eligibility if there's multiple uses. And that's where we try to partner with Jodi through state parks grants. Sometimes we've been fortunate that there's foundation grants. The Myers Memorial and the Ford Family Foundation have been very interested in things like this. So many of our applicants have been able to secure those kind of funds as match to some of our grants to cover things that maybe are not eligible. But it really, if you've got water access or you think you have water access, I would say reach out to us. We'd be happy to come and take a look, talk to the right folks. If it is a complex water access, then I would say let's bring state parks into it, as well as ODF&W. Their restoration enhancement program is fantastic to work with. They have a sport fish restoration program, and they generally utilize our grant program to help spend the boating dollars. But we really have some good partnership agencies on this call, and we try to work pretty closely to leverage each other's funding to the maximum ability that we can. Don't know if you have anything else to add, Jodi?
Yeah, I'll just add, you know, Mark, if this is like a locally managed site by a city or county or a state agency, then it could be a perfect fit for a local government grant program or a land and water conservation program, because those, it doesn't really matter, you know, is it a trail, is it a waterway access, is it fishing? So those are pretty broad programs depending on who owns the land. And then RTP, water trails and trails are eligible. So that's where, you know, Janine and I connect a lot when we have questions like this that come up where we're trying to figure out which one will be a best fit. So yeah, as Janine said, and I don't know if Charlotte has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would just add on that definitely reach out to ODFW. So the OCRF is part of obviously ODFW, and depending on what the purpose of the water access is, it could be a great fit for the multitude of grants that we offer. And also if the access has any sort of kind of consideration to the surrounding environment, like if the access point is trying to avoid a key conservation area or avoid any sort of conflict with nature, it actually could be a good fit for OCRF. That connection of trying to provide access to outdoor recreation, but being conservationally minded. So it really does depend on the project, but definitely happy to help with any sort of connections there.
Well, I want to thank again all of our panelists for participating today. I would expect that people have lots of questions or research items left for them as you got introduced to many opportunities today. And so we will share both the webinar recording along with links where you can go to learn more on your own time on our blog. We'll send that info out when it is available to everyone who registered for the webinar, or you can just check back out at OregonTrailsCoalition.org for that info to find it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thanks to our panelists for the work you do with these programs, and thanks to all of our attendees for all the work that you do for Oregon Trails and for the greater public to access these opportunities in our communities. Thank you.